Well, hello and welcome to our latest test drive. As you can see, it is the lesser spotted Case IH telehandler. Now that might be a little bit of an unfair statement considering Case only started offering telehandlers in its portfolio I think in about 2015. However, I think since then there's quite a few on farm these days, and also quite obviously as well, it probably comes as no surprise that Case shares its telehandlers with New Holland's telehandlers. Now, unlike a lot of tractor manufacturers, such as Claas, who use Liebherr telehandlers, and Massey Ferguson, who use Bobcat telehandlers, Case IH's and New Holland's, it's actually their own built machines, coming from the CNH industrial family. Now, as before, when it expanded its portfolio back in 2015 with the inclusion of telehandlers, there was 6 models at that initial launch, and there are 6 models still today. Now the smallest one in the range is built by DHE, and like I say, the 5 largest ones are all CNH own built machines. Now since then they've undergone quite a few little updates, such as smoother power shift transmission, a lot more comfort and refinement, and easier maintenance. So without further ado, let's have a quick look around the machine and see what those updates do to it. Now within that 6 model range, like a lot of other manufacturers, Case offer sort of 2 high spec models. There's a 636 and there's this one we've got today, which is the 742. Both of them get a 4.5 litre FPT engine producing about 145 horsepower maximum. Both get a 140 litre per minute load sensing hydraulic pump, and both get a 6-speed fully automatic transmission. So let's kick off with access then. As you can see, it's a nice big wide opening door. Got the upper half which folds all the way back and folds fairly tight up against the main cab frame, so everything's nice and flush, especially when you're working in tight buildings, which is always good. Opens nice and wide. Huge door to get through. Step is quite high, but it is quite a high capacity machine, and if you did have another step there, it's likely it probably would catch on something. Getting in, not an issue whatsoever. There is nothing to catch your overalls getting in and out of here. Plenty of grab handles there, and there's nothing up here to clonk your head on as you jump in and out as well, which I've been known to do being 6'3". And also, when you shut the door and open the door, you're not reaching down here for inconvenient handles. It's just up here on the main rail. Pop it open and away you go. So what do you get in the cab of the Farmlift 742? Well, it's quite a familiar environment if you've ever driven something like the Case Farmall tractor, something like that. A lot of the switch gear and the dash especially is adopted from that tractor range. The layout couldn't be simpler. There's nothing hidden. You got your main console here showing all your main information, easy to glance analog dials for such as fuel, temperature and your load limiter gauge, and then like I say, all your switch gear is nice and neatly laid out, dead simple to follow. You've got a nice obvious button here for your 3 transmission modes, road mode, hydraulic lock, that kind of thing along there. And then the main bit really, which is what you'll be using constantly, is the joystick here. Now that is mounted on the armrest, so it moves with the seat, like a lot of high-spec telehandlers. It's nicely, it falls nice and neatly to hand, and you can adjust the armrest backwards and forwards. Like I say, the controls and the switches on the joystick itself are fairly obvious as to what they do. You got 2 proportional roller switches, I should say, for third surface and the boom in and out, and then you got forwards and reverse on here, and you can flick up and down the power shift transmission. Now, as well as the forwards and reverse on there, you've also got your left hand shuttle as well, so it suits both preferences, whether you like to use that or you prefer to use this. Now, one thing I'm not so keen on, which I've seen on other models, so for example 2 weeks ago we had the new Claas Scorpion telehandlers. Now Claas put the third service on the back of the joystick, which makes it a lot easier to sort of carry out multiple actions. You can really use your thumbs and your fingers to their maximum, whereas this, because everything is effectively on the face of the joystick, it means your thumb is kept very busy. Like I say, you can take some of that sort of workload away from your right hand thumb and use your left hand shuttle lever there. As mentioned, all your switches are on here, there's nothing hidden. There's no switches up here like there is in that Class Scorpion telehandler I just mentioned. There's nothing hidden up here, there's nothing hidden around the back. The only other two switches are pretty much down here for the reverse fan, and you've got the third service auxiliary dump, which is always a handy feature to have. Now, visibility, pretty decent all round. There's loads of glass in this cab. As you can see on the doors, it goes right down to the floor there, right down to the floor at the back, and it goes right down, sort of midway down the cab, down on the right hand side as well. The major sort of downside when it comes to visibility, and it's a problem on most telehandlers, but it's quite apparent on this one, although you can see that Case has made every effort to make it as good as possible, is over to the right hand rear quarter. They have kept the exhaust nice and low, which is good. However, this engine bay and this bonnet, it's a hell of a thing. It looks like you could play a team sport on that bonnet, and it is quite bulbous and bulky, which really, you know, it really shows when you're in tight confined buildings such as we've been in today. If you're out in the field shifting straw or loading out of a muck heap, it's not going to be a problem. In terms of space and storage, as you can see, I'm 6'3", I've got loads of legroom, loads of headroom. You can get the steering wheel in a really nice comfy position, telescopes and tilt, which is good. In terms of storage, there's a handy little toolbox here. There's a bit of a recessed area down there, which is where I've got my drink, and there's another little recessed area behind the seat there, and then there's also a seat pocket. So in-cab storage, not too shabby. And that's also boosted by, there's a toolbox at the front, just for good measure, and for even more measure, there's a toolbox at the back as well. So when it comes to toolboxes, it's not found wanting. Right then, on to the bit that makes a telehandler, and that is the hydraulics and the flow of those hydraulics, which, as previously mentioned on this machine, is about 140 litres per minute from a load sensing pump. Now, it does offer fairly decent movement of the boom and the attachments and whatnot, and when you start trying to do multiple movements such as the grab and the boom and the lift and whatever else, it does keep up fairly well. I won't say it's absolutely sort of blistering fast, such as that Class Scorpion we tried a couple of weeks ago, which had, I think that was 160 litres per minute. That was quite a bit more snappier than what this is. However, like I say, it's not too shabby. And in terms of response as well, from the joystick, it's fairly good, and as mentioned as well, all the joystick and all the roller switches, they're all proportional controls. Now, in terms of the headstock, as you can see, it is one of them pin and cone flavours. As you can imagine, there are several headstock options to choose from, but you probably can't go too far wrong with the good old pin and cone, especially if you've got a few old Macbro attachments kicking around the yard. Now, in terms of the third service or auxiliary service, whatever you want to call it, this is plumbed up here and mounted on the swan neck, as you might call it. It's not too, you know, it's quite convenient where it is there. Personally, I prefer these couplings mounted on the actual headstock with a bracket. It means these can be kept nice and short here and they don't move, whereas when it's attached on here, you've got a big long length and then they flex and contort and whatever else as the attachment moves. So just a minor little niggle. Now, when uncoupling and coupling the third service there is a handy auxiliary hydraulic dump feature activated from in the cab just by a simple rocker switch. But I also believe there is an option to have it just mounted here on the exterior, so if you do forget it before you've got out the cab, you can soon hit it there. So while we're at the front end, we might as well have a little bit of a look at the axles and steering. Now, on this particular machine, front and rear, it does feature limited slip differentials. Now, unlike a pivot steer wheel loader that does feature LSDs, maybe such as JCB's 435S, something like that, they can feel a little bit heavy on the steering when you're turning in a yard. However, on this, steering is light as a feather. It takes little to no effort at all. Steering lock itself, good. Probably not the best on the market, but still good. Go check out the full specs on that. And as like most telehandlers, it's got your good old 3 steering modes. You've got crab steering, 4-wheel steering and front wheel steering. But unlike before, which is a big improvement, you now don't have to manually align the wheels before you switch between the steering modes. It's all automatic these days on this machine. Round the back, things are fairly accessible. Diesel tank up there, AdBlue tank just there. And then for ease of daily maintenance, they have grouped certain banks of grease points together. So there's 4 there for axles and pivot points and whatnot. Another toolbox number 3 out the back, maybe as it's at the back, put pins in, whatever. And then finally at the back end, as you can see, there is a really handy sight glass for the hydraulic level, and as an option you can get a Cherry Products pickup hitch, which is simply operated via, there's a diverter switch in the cab, switch it to rear spools here, and then just use your 3rd service and away you go. Now, while we're on the back corner of the machine, I just thought I'd show you the compromises that telehandler manufacturers have to make when it comes to packaging their machines. Now in this case, IH has done a half decent job by keeping the exhaust nice and low, so you have got fairly decent views from the cab. However, it does use fixed mud guards, which obviously they don't move with the steering angle, which means this bit will always stick out further than the tyre, so it's just something to be aware of. However, it does look quite good. However, the biggest and bulkiest item on this telehandler is this whopping great engine bay. So what's under that engine bay? Well, if we stick my little stick in the hole, we'll find out. Now, as you can imagine, with it being part of the CNH industrial family, power comes from a FPT 4.5 litre 4-cylinder engine, churning about 145 horsepower max on this particular model. Like I said, this is one of the high-spec models in the range, so it gets that extra GGs. Now, at first glance, it's busy. That is a busy engine bay. However, daily checks aren't too shabby. Obviously, you've got oil dipstick there, header tank just up there, and if you are working in those dusty environments day in day out, you've got your air cleaner right there. Also back here, like I say, with the packaging challenges, unlike a lot of manufacturers who put the radiator down there, they put their main cores up there, drawing air in that way and in that way, and then out that way. Now, just in case that mesh up there does get full of debris, dust, straw, whatever, it does have a reversible fan as well. Now, the bit for you service guys, check this out for access. You might have to fast forward this bit. There, voila! So you've pretty much got all your main filters to hand. Obviously there, and one up there. Batteries down there as well. Now what it's like to get onto the back of the engine, I don't know. I wouldn't like to try personally. Now the other major aspect of the telehandler, which is the transmission. Now, unlike the smallest model in the range, which uses a single stage hydrostatic transmission, the 5 largest models use a power shift. Now, the 2 high-spec machines which we've been banging on about, such as this 742, use a 6x3 speed power shift transmission, and then the rest of them use a 4-speed forward as standard, but I think you can get a 6-speed as an option on those other models. Now, in this machine's case, like I say, 6x3 power shift speeds, you can operate it in one of 3 modes, dead simple to switch between on the dash, and they are manual, semi-automatic and fully automatic. Now, as you've seen today, loading in and out of the buildings, semi-automatic was a fairly decent shout, especially when you've got sort of short to medium runs. Obviously on the road you might want to stick it in fully auto, or when you're bombing around fields and whatnot, collecting straw. Like I say, fully automatic might be the one for you, or if you are in confined spaces, in buildings, you're pallet stacking, something like that, then if you want absolute total control over the machine and you don't want any surprises what the engine and transmission are going to do, then probably manual mode would be the one for you. Now on top of that, and it's a lot like you can get in tractors these days, it does have a brake to neutral function, which is a very similar system to what a lot of other telehandler manufacturers use, And basically, as the name suggests, as you press the brake pedal, it will basically dump the transmission or decouple the transmission. So when you're if you are revving the engine to make the hydraulics work, it's then not fighting with the transmission. However, as we found, it doesn't work that brilliantly. It's alright, it's not bad, but it just lacks a certain amount of refinement, and when you release the brakes it sort of jumps back into gear again. So a little bit of work to do on that. Apart from that, the updates that Case has made to the 6-speed transmission, particularly for the automatic modes and semi-automatic modes, is noticeable. It's a lot more smoother than it used to be, and also as well the relationship between the engine and the transmission, it's a lot more responsive. It's got a lot more get up and go about it, and you're soon at, you know, the desired target speed quicker than you were previously. So where does the Farmlift fit in the grand scheme of things, particularly this 742 model behind me? Well, I think it's fair to say it's a good solid machine, and you'd be hard pressed to argue otherwise. I think the improvements that Case has made to it, particularly with the transmission refinement, the cab comfort and the easier maintenance aspects to it, all go a long way to ultimately making it a better machine. However, with something like this, particularly as a machine which is branded up as a tractor brand, Case IH in this case, you're going to be really hard pressed to, you know, get it into a farm which is, you know, that's a die-hard John Deere user. Also as well, you've got to consider it's up against some really tough competition, especially the specialist manufacturers such as JCB, Manitou and Merlot. However, like I say, it is decent, it is worth considering. I'd still like to see a few more improvements. I still think the transmission could be a touch more refined, and I think that sort of brake to neutral feature, whatever you want to call it, still wants quite a bit of improvement. And if they could as well, I'd just like that little bit more hydraulic performance.